This is 6.4 day 1, factoring polynomials. This should be a nice review for you today from lesson 5.3. You don't need to write this slide down. So to review, the first thing is you want to look and see if you have a greatest common factor, the GCF. That's the first thing you always do in factoring. Then once you have factored the GCF out, you look to see how many terms you have. If you have 2 terms, you most likely will have the difference of 2 squareds, where it's a squared minus b squared equals a minus b, a plus b. This is a new one. You haven't learned it yet. You will learn it later on in the lesson. If you have 2 terms, and you could have the sum or the difference of cubes, and we'll look at that later. If you have 3 terms, you have 2 choices. The chart method, where the leading coefficient is 1, and the AC method, when the leading coefficient is not 1. And then the last method of factoring that we did in chapter 5 is when you have 4 terms. Then you group. All right, let's go on to our first example. Go ahead and write this down. We want to factor this polynomial. And there's a hint. We want to factor out the GCF. So the GCF of this is x. So we're going to divide out an x from all 3 terms. So what are we left with? We're left with x squared plus 6x plus 8. Then we look inside the parentheses and we say, how can we continue factoring that parentheses? Well, it's a trinomial, it's 3 terms, and its leading coefficient is 1. So we can use the chart method. And the chart method looks like this. You want to factor the C that adds to the B. So we factor out 8, 4 times 2, and then we want to make sure it adds to 6. So 4 plus 2 is 6. These are the 2 terms we're going to work with, 4 and 2. Where students make mistakes is they forget when they take out that GCF that it's still there. So that x is still there. Now remember we had that x squared plus 6x plus 8. Well, that's going to split into 2 parentheses. And that's from our chart. So we split up our x's, x and x. And then from our chart, plus 4, plus 2. Now it's completely factored. What we'll go on to later is to solve those equations for x, to be able to find maybe the roots or the zeros or the x-intercepts of the graph. Let's go on to review factoring again. Let's do now the grouping method. We know to use the grouping method when we have 4 terms. So go ahead and write this example down. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to group the first 2 and the last 2. Some teachers just say split the first 2 terms down the middle and then group there. I personally like where you group the first 2 and the last 2. And you work on their GCFs of each group. So in the first group, the red group, what is the GCF? Well, the GCF in that group is x squared. So what we're left with is x plus 3. Now we go on to the next group, the blue group. We take out the GCF there. Or we can divide out -2. So we're left with x plus 3. What will happen every time if we've done this correctly are the 2 parentheses will be exactly the same. X plus 3, x plus 3. So that is your new GCF. So I'm going to pull out the x plus 3's. And now what am I left with? If I pull this x plus 3 out, I'm left with the x squared. If I pull this x plus 3 out, what am I left with? -2. So now it is completely factored. All right, let's go on to the new type of problem. It's called the sum of cubes. This is when you have two perfect cubes and there's an addition sign in between them. Go ahead and write this down with its rule. How you factor a cubed plus b cubed is what is in the blue. You'll have a parentheses with a plus b, then you'll have a second parentheses with a squared minus ab plus b squared. You do need to memorize this rule of how you factor the sum of cubes. Okay, so let's do our first example. We want to factor y cubed plus 8. So I just start off with an easier one. So we look at how many terms it has. It has 2 terms, and we want to have each term be a cube. Well, y cubed is a cubed already, but 8 is not. So let's rewrite 8 as a perfect cube. So 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Now we can go ahead and identify what is the a and the b. So the y is my a value, and my 2 is my b value in this rule. So now I can go ahead and separate it. The first parenthesis is going to be a plus b, so y plus 2. And then my second parenthesis is going to be a squared, so that is y squared minus ab, so y times 2 plus b squared, which is 2 squared. Now I'll just go ahead and clean up that second parentheses. So y plus 2, and then y squared. Negative y times 2 is negative 2y. And then 2 times 2 is 4. And that's how you do the sum of cubes. Here's a second example. Just go ahead and write the example down in the green. So you're looking to see how can you rewrite the terms so that they are cubes. Well, x times x times x, that's x cubed is fine. But the 27 can be rewritten as 3 cubed. So this is my a, and there is my b, and I throw it into the blue rule right here. So the first parenthesis is a plus b, or x plus 3. Then the second parenthesis is going to be the x squared minus x times 3 plus 3 squared. And now I just clean up that second parenthesis. Negative x times 3 is negative 3x. 3 times 3 is 9. All right, go ahead and write this rule down. Very similar to the last rule, but now it's the difference of cubes. It's 2 perfect cubes, but now it has subtraction. And be very careful on this. Notice this sign right here. That is a plus. Where mistakes happen is usually right there. Now we're going to go ahead and do an example after you write this rule up. We're going to factor y cubed minus 125. So the first thing we do is we look and see how many terms it has. It's 2 terms. And we want to rewrite them so they are perfect cubes. Well, the first one it already is a perfect cube, that's y cubed. But then we have to rewrite 125 as a cubed. So that's 5 times 5 times 5. Now identify my a and my b. Here is the a, and there is the b in my blue formula. So I can rewrite it as y minus 5 y squared plus y times 5 and then plus 5 squared. Clean up the second parentheses, y minus 5, y squared. Y times 5 is 5y. 5 times 5 is 25. We'll just do one more. This is a more difficult one. Go ahead and write the green equation down. Right here. So we want to rewrite these two terms as perfect cubes. So let's look at the 64 first. 64 can be rewritten as 3 times 3 times 3. And then 8 can be written as 2 times 2 times 2. So write this as 4x, all cubed, and then 8y cubed as 2 times 2 times 2. Oops. Now we have 4x minus 2y. Then we have 4x squared plus 4x times 2y plus 2y squared. Now clean up that second parentheses. 4x times 4x is 16x squared. 4x times 2y is 8xy. And then 2y times 2y is 4y squared. All right. There is your assignment for 6.4 day 1.